Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I've been talking to the world's top primate experts about your work and about Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Positive feedback.
Great.
Superb.
Great.
Amazing.
Wow.
Transformative.
Wow.
So you've impressed the boffins.
Well, that's always a good thing.
It's not easily done.
No, absolutely. I mean, obviously, because we're straddling the worlds of science fiction and fact and metaphor and allegory, and it's obviously trying to do the research into behavioural studies is an important part. But of course, there are areas we do depart from. So it's good to know that it sort of fits in with a sort of a kind of a view that it's not too far from the truth.
No, I don't think it is. I was talking to Karen Conoval about Morris,
yes.
And she said before joining the cast of Planet of the Apes, she hadn't portrayed an ape before, so she went to Seattle Zoo. She spent some time with an orangutan there, but she said it was a steep learning curve because she was coming to it new. Now, you haven't come to this new.
Sure.
You've got years of experience behind you. So what we want to know is Caesar an amalgam of your wealth of experience, or could you think of a specific chimp that you've known who could inspire Caesar?
Absolutely. I mean, my work with primates really started off with King Kong, but I was obviously studying gorillas for that. And I very much wanted to play our version of Kong, which was shot in 2005, as a, as close to a silverback, a male silverback, as possible, given that in 1933, when the original was made, there was very little known about gorillas. They were believed to be sort of these dark, mysterious beasts that sort of flitted in and amongst jungles and were sort of almost monster-like. So that I wanted to very much put that right, and Peter Jackson agreed that was the way to go. And so the level of anthropomorphization, once the study had been done, was another journey. But I actually started off by doing a lot of research into gorillas, both in captivity and then went to Rwanda and studied with the Diane Fossey Gorilla Fund International, and they took me and spent time with a troop of 23 gorillas there. So I'd begun to sort of uncover the sort of world of exploring primates. But when it came to playing Caesar, of course, I mean, Caesar's a chimpanzee, so it's totally different. But it was a slightly different remit in the sense that Caesar was never just going to be. It wasn't going to be a case of finding a character to fit in with a chimpanzee, because this was in itself a very special chimpanzee, Caesar, who had inherited this the fallout of an Alzheimer's drug, an enhanced intelligence drug, and that had been coursing through his veins from birth. So there was a certain set of assumptions about the character. And then also the fact that he was brought up by a human being. So I played Caesar, obviously, from infancy through teenagehood into this young, rebellious leader, if you like, who then in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes now has evolved physically, emotionally, his cognitive skills and his... physically he's become much more bipedal. He is able to speak now. In the first film, we were able to show him speaking a few words, and then by the end of this film, he's able to put together some quite considered and reflective and philosophical thoughts, as opposed to just emotional outbursts. So really, in playing this character, I had to find. I mean, it was both an exploration of chimpanzee behaviour, but also other things too. But I did base him very, very closely on a chimpanzee called Oliver, who was a fairly well-known chimpanzee in the media in the 1970s, who had a lot of early DNA experiments performed on him, particularly in Japan. Because he had this extraordinary bipedal gait. He never ever walked as a quadruped. He would sit down in a chair. He had very human facial expressions. He was surrounded by human beings, brought up by human beings till he hit adolescence, at which point he became quite aggressive and sexually active and quite a handful.
Oh, yeah.
To put it mildly. And so I based him very much on that. And not only that, I based Caesar on the idea of being a human being trapped in an ape's skin, very much. That was the mental state that I started him off in, because he doesn't really relate to his own kind when he's young. He's brought up by a human father and reflected his father's behaviour and beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes through really well in the film, because I saw it a couple of days ago.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, it's excellent. And I can see that the way you've thought about Caesar and developed Caesar, you've considered his social conditioning and also his biology.
Absolutely.
And that's part of his conflict.
Absolutely right. So when people ask me, is it when you're playing a character like this, is it just about emulating monkey movements? I go, well, no. This is a character that is multi-layered, very complex. Psychologically, like you say, social conditioning, and his physical journey, and the emotional intelligence and his empathy, his ability to empathise, very much is born out of this inner conflict and being able to, relate to human beings in the same way that he does to apes without any prejudice.
And that's his dilemma. So I want you now to cast your mind back to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy days. Okay, I've been talking to Professor Leslie Aiello. You met her during that process.
Yes.
She was advising on the Australopithecines, and you impressed her with how you transform into a chimp. You showed her your technique. You broke it down. You tensed your hind limbs. You bowed your legs. She was really impressed. She said you were amazing.
Wow.
She and I were talking about the kind of the level of expertise and research in your work, and I was wondering, is that how you set the standard for your work? If you can convince a top primate expert, does that mean that therefore the general public should be happy with your performance?
Well, let me. I mean, if I go back to Kong, I mean that was so if you were to compare King Kong to Caesar in this, I actually went all out to try and emulate a silverback's behaviour, and then have elements of when we played him out on set, when I played opposite Naomi Watts, it was in a way we had a smaller spectrum of anthropomorphization, so we didn't want to push him too far, but at the same time you're still trying to convey emotion ultimately on screen and behaviour and thoughts to an audience without over signalling it. So, but then the bluff charges, the sort of the chest beating. For instance, in the 1933 Kong, he beats his chest with clenched fists, which of course gorillas never do. They're cupped hands to resonate very quickly, and they beat at 17 beats per second or whatever. That's that sort of detail. The way that Kong, rolled his arms, the level of the shape of his spine, etc., etc. And also the fact that gorillas or any apes are so idiosyncratic and have moods, and as we all know, they have such vastly ranging personalities. That was the exploration there. But with Caesar, it's his science fiction journey that he goes on, which is rather bizarre because Kong's a 25-foot gorilla, but that's beside the point. But with Caesar's journey is about an accelerated evolution, and one has to kind of go, what if this were to happen? How would the body transform physically, biologically? How, what sort of things would start to happen? And I mean, it's things like in this film, for instance. See, in the first film, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, there's a scene where Caesar takes a fork from his, in effect, grandfather's hand. He's the scientist's father who has Alzheimer's, and he's picked up a fork the wrong way around, and he's trying to cut an egg with it. And Caesar gently sort of takes it off him and then turns it around. And the way looking back on that, the way I did that was very much with chimpanzee-like hands from the study of watching chimpanzees' hands. Now, in this version, in Dawn, and Caesar has evolved now, he's 20 years older in effect. He's much more human-like in the way that he holds his hands, and that's a conscious decision to physically change with minor or tiny detail, nuanced detail. To just see the journey. If you look at the journey of how the hands are used, for instance, throughout those two films, that they are completely changes. So that's an example, I suppose.
No, that's really interesting, because that takes me on to my next question. Professor David Geary, who's an expert on the evolution of ape behaviour, he wants me to ask you, comparing Kong, gorilla, with Caesar, chimp, which of these two performances took the greatest effort from you as a performer?
In terms of physical effort, or just complexity of playing the character?
Really to do with movement.
Okay. Well, Kong was to get the movement right for Kong was hard work, very hard work, and in terms of I had a lot of weights because to get the wrecking ball of the way that Kong rolls his arms, I had huge weights on my forearms. I carried a very, very heavy weight belt and weights on the ankles because, you know, to get the scale and size of the character. And then the pressure on the knuckles, because I was actually knuckle walking with that. So physically, that actually, I mean, my knuckles have never been the same since.
Right. Yeah.
So that was particularly challenging. Having said that, when I played the young Caesar, the infant Caesar, that was very, very physically, because it was completely opposite. Of course, convex back, you know, very tightly pulled in and tucked under, and I was on arm extensions, but the pressure on the thigh muscles and holding that together, and the energy of a young chimp was equally taxing.
So can you tell me which took more effort?
Actually, I think young Caesar probably took more effort ultimately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was the right answer for Professor Geary. That was anyway, because his theory is, although genetically we're closer to chimps, and they're more recently evolved, we're closer to them through time. Actually, the human lineage has retained a lot of gorilla behaviour.
Right.
Particularly to do with family.
Right.
And breeding.
Right. Right.
And so he asked me to go to a drama school. So I went to the Young Actors Theatre in Islington because you
yeah, that's right.
You went there, didn't you? Yeah.
Yes, I did.
And so they got a small sample together for me, and the results were 50-50 for the boys, but for the girls, in terms of effort, chimps took a bit more effort. I think it was 60-40.
Yeah.
So I'm going to feed all this back to Professor Geary.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I was considering all of this, and I was thinking this is so interesting that you know, you went to top experts for advice on being a gorilla, portraying a chimpanzee, giving it authenticity, and now these top experts are looking at your work and the work of moving. A movement, and that's going to affect the direction they take their sciences. But because Geary was saying to me that he's just realised through thinking of your work and thinking of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes that he hasn't considered movement enough, and the comparisons between the way humans move, chimps move, and gorillas move.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and so I'm going to feed all this back
Brilliant.
to him. So is that satisfying that you're actually having an effect over science?
Of course, absolutely, yes. I mean, one doesn't think of drama and storytelling informing science, actually. But of course that's not true, because science fiction does, and I'm sure ideas are flowing in both directions.
Yeah. It's a nice synergy.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful.
Yeah. And very quickly, one last question, because I think we've pretty much run out of time. Ape expert France de Waal loved the film, but he'd like to see some ape sex. So can you give him ape sex in the next film, please?
That would be my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to that.
Andy Serkis, Naked Ape, actor extraordinaire. Thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you. That was great.